Greetings, welcome to Dungeons and GURPS. I'm Enraged Eggplant, and in this video I would like to talk about the various elven subraces of Karilan, my fantasy campaign setting. In D&D there are so many different elven subraces that it sort of became a meme. Some have a lot written about them, and some have literally one line of text devoted to them. Personally, I'm okay with this racial variety. I think that a race with such a long history is bound to have various different cultures and ethnicities. On Karilan, almost all elves have a common history. Their ancient nation of Sailoril spanned the entirety of the northern Aril and had colonies on other continents. Elder Elven society had 5 castes: fire, water, wind, wood, and metal. The purpose of these castes has been lost to time. Many thousands years ago, the archmages of Sailoril decided to open what they called the Vast Gate, a magical portal that would bind all planes of existence together. The ritual went awry, and the resulting cataclysm paved way to a civil war that has split Sailoril into multiple smaller nations, at odds with one another. The planar experiment also attracted attention of the Far Realm, an extraplanar place of madness. Sometime during the Civil War, there have been some perturbations in the Elven pantheon that affected the mortals as well. During this time, elves, that would later become the Drow, fled into the Underdark. The Dusk Elves renounced Karilan Larethian and fled to the savage lands to live in isolation, hidden by the divine powers of another elven deity, Sehanine Moonbow. Another group of elves was tricked into service by an archfiend. They would later be known as Ghost Elves. Yet another group of elves decided to flee into the Underdark, but they did not follow Lolth. They would renounce the entire elven pantheon and live in utter isolation. These semi-legendary beings later would be called the Rockseer Elves. In the current times, elves are still split into 5 ethnic groups: Fire Elves, Water Elves, Metal Elves, Wind Elves, and Wood Elves. Most of them live on the continent of Aril, but many also have presence on other continents such as Mishtafalon and Aventan. Before I talk about the actual subraces, I have to mention certain physiological features of the elves. Most elves do not sleep, as members of the other common races do. Instead, an elf meditates in a deep trance for 4 hours a day. An elf resting in this fashion gains the same benefit that a human does from 8 hours of sleep. While meditating, an elf dreams, though these dreams are actually mental exercises that have become reflexive through years of practice. The elf is still conscious and aware of his surroundings, but immobile. The Aventian word for an elf meditation is trance, as in 4 hours of trance, but the elves themselves call this reverie. When an elf is suffering from a disease, poison, or is below 2/3 of his HP, he cannot enter this meditative state and has to sleep normally. Some elves develop their innate meditative abilities further, becoming able to share emotions with other elves. When interacting with another elf or half-elf in person, or telepathically communicating with them in the elven reverie, an elf with empathic senses can get a feel of their emotional state as per the empathy advantage. The other elf feels this mental intrusion and may resist automatically if they do not want to share their emotions. Additionally, an elf with this ability can communicate with other elves in their reverie as per the telescent advantage, but only if he enters the reverie state himself. Rolls to establish contact are made at +6, so basically elves can have something of a dream internet connection with one another. The first ethnic group is Fire Elves that encompasses 6 different subraces. Formerly nomadic Desert Elves lived in the desert and steppes of Indaril. They have yellowish skin and dark straight hair, and their bodies are resistant to the desert heat. Adapted to arid environments, They are tolerant to the lack of food, water and protection from the sun. The Fire Elves are relatively numerous in numbers. They are talented magicians and psions, and their bodies are resistant to fire. Being attuned to the element of fire, they take damage when submerged in water. However, this does not prevent them from drinking and bathing, although quickly, without harming themselves. Fire Elves have reddish skin and fiery red hair. The Painted Elves lived in petrified forests of Indoril, but since then have spread out further and now live even in the southern Viril Aventus. These light-skinned elves paint their skin with pigments derived from minerals. Their eyes tend to have exotic colors, like purple, cyan or yellow. The Painted Elves are renowned stargazers and astrologers, having adapted completely to life under starlight. The Mountain Elves have keen vision, amazing balance and typically average appearance, except for their atypical bright blue hair. They used to live in the snow peaks, but the sudden appearance and expansion of the Sheen Cyst, alien machine invaders, has eliminated most of them. Now the few surviving refugees mostly live in Indoril. Deep Elves are similar to their Mountain Elf cousins, but instead of living on top of the mountains, they live in the caverns beneath them. While not as keen-eyed or sure-footed as their introversive, higher-altitude relatives, they make up for it by being stronger and able to see well in poorly lit caverns. They usually get along well with dwarves. Although their skin color varies, they tend to be pale because they spend much of their time away from sunlight. Albinism is more common than among other elves. Eye color varies. They often get mistaken for the Drow by the Underdark races. The Mist Elves, also known as the Daoyin, live in the misty hills of eastern Mishtafalon. The Daoyin's eyes burn with purpose and determination, and they tackle any challenge they meet with the same energy and enthusiasm. Their bravado hides some sadness that expresses itself when the elf gets drunk or just awakens from trance. Under poor lighting conditions, a Mist Elf could be confused with a human, as their frames are taller and broader than those of other elves. Even their ears are not as pointed and their faces not as angular. Grey Elves declare this to be a sign of their blood's corruption, but the Daoyin answer with a formal challenge to hand-to-hand combat, which tends to silence the offender quickly. They dress in vivid greens and blues, favoring short tunics and capes that tie at one's shoulder. Warriors and sorcerers practice ritual scarring over their arms, which, with war paint, give them a ferocious aspect when charging into combat. Daoyin become adventurers as part of their quest for fulfillment. They join any party that follows their ideals and do their best to become an indispensable part of the group. Metal Elves always were a singular subrace, now known as the Ghost Elves, now dwelling in the extraplanar realm of Avarils, adjacent to the haunted forest of western Mishtafalon. Ghost Elves dwelt on the fringes of elven society in the ancient times. They made their homes amid the ancient roots of the forests, rarely making contact with the other races. Over time, the Ghost Elves grew more and more isolated, eventually becoming little more than a legend. They have an interesting history that you can read in Dragon Magazine 313, but in short, they were almost wiped out by the Drow, saved by forging a pact with an infernal archduke. After serving for centuries in hell, the Ghost Elves managed to contact the archduke's enemies and stage a revolt, then fled to the ethereal plane. Ghost Elves have the same range of height and weight as elves, but are slightly frailer, a consequence of the destruction of their bond with the land. They reach adulthood at about age 30 and have a lifespan roughly 100 years shorter than of other elves, although they do not show their age until a few years before death. Grey hair and pale skin are nearly universal, with the occasional throwback having jet black hair. The eyes of Ghost Elves are their most striking feature. They are like twin mirrors lacking white, iris, and pupil. Their skin glows with a pale white light in the darkness. They are often mistaken for ghosts, even by other elves, hence their name. Ghost Elves' attire is usually light and flowing, colored gray, silver, or white. In battle, they favor light armor, such as leather or mithril shirts. On the material plane, they dress like ordinary elves, in an effort to disguise themselves from distant observers. Water Elves originally were a singular subrace, now known as the Aquatic Elves. They dwell in their underwater realm of Quataril, but can be seen in isolated underwater settlements in other parts of the ocean. The children of deep Sashelas, Aquatic Elves dwell in the shallower parts of the ocean, usually within a few miles of the coast. For the deeper parts of the sea tend to be not only too cold and lightless for their taste, but also home to their blood enemies, the Thahuagin. Aquatic elves tend to be seen as standoffish creatures hesitant to trust outsiders, and this is true to some extent. Aquatic elves understand the value and importance of community in their survival beneath the waves. They are very suspicious of strangers, especially those who come from the surface world. Nonetheless, they know the value of a strong alliance and, once their fears are allayed, make staunch compatriots. Aquatic elves are very striking in appearance, with skin that ranges between a light blue to a dark green. They usually have black hair and their eyes are oddly colored, ranging from an iridescent blue to gold to a white-silver hue that shines like mother of pearl. Their hands and feet are webbed, and they boast a set of gills that run along their collarbones and down their rib cages. Aquatic elves have long memories, and they do not trust quickly. They are more than happy to allow tribes of merfolk to wander into their territories and even stay for a while, but Lokatha and other such beings are not permitted within a day's swim of aquatic elf cities. Aquatic elf cities are wonders to behold, crafted as they are of living coral, just as many elf cities on land are made of still living trees. They gleam with mother of pearl and shells scoured bright, and among them swim fish of 1,000 colors. The borders of these cities are guarded by soldiers with tridents, spears, and nets, as are the hunter-gatherer parties sent out to retrieve food among the fish and carefully cultivated fields of food plants nearby. Several hundreds years ago, after the flood that destroyed Aventus, a subrace splintered off the aquatic elves. Calling themselves Marels, these evil water elves venerated Umberly instead of deep Sashelas. These pale-skinned elves have blackish-green hair and green eyes, which have a phosphorescent glow. They are otherwise identical to aquatic elves. They are sometimes called sea drow, although there is no relation to true drow. Wind elves can be encountered in the northern Avarils and occasionally in other lands. This category of elves encompasses the largest number of subraces. High elves, the most numerous elves in the world, are talented archers and magicians. High elves mingle freely in human lands, always welcome yet never at home there. They are well known for their poetry, dance, song, lore, and magical arts. Elves favor things of natural and simple beauty. When danger threatens their woodland homes, elves reveal a more martial side, demonstrating skill with sword, bow, and battle strategy. High elves are more often amused than excited, and more likely to be curious than greedy. With such a long lifespan, they tend to keep a broad perspective on events, remaining aloof and unfazed by petty happenstance. When pursuing a goal, however, whether an adventurous mission or learning a new skill or art, they can be focused and relentless. They are slow to make friends and enemies, and even slower to forget them. They reply to petty insults with disdain, and to serious insults with vengeance. High elves are short and slim, standing between 4.5 to 5.5 feet tall, and typically weighing 95 to 135 pounds, with elf men the same height as and only marginally heavier than elf women. They are graceful but frail. They tend to be pale-skinned and dark-haired, with deep green eyes. Elves have no facial or body hair. They prefer simple, comfortable clothes, especially in pastel blue and greens, and they enjoy simple yet elegant jewelry. Elves possess unearthly grace and fine features. Many humans and members of other races find them hauntingly beautiful. An elf reaches adulthood at about 110 years of age and can live to be more than 700 years old. Grey elves have a reputation for being aloof and arrogant even by elven standards. They certainly are more reclusive than high elves, living in isolated mountain citadels and allowing entry only to a select few outsiders. They have either silver hair and amber eyes, or pale golden hair and violet eyes. They prefer clothing of white, silver, yellow, or gold, with cloaks of deep blue or purple. Their minds are strong, but bodies are weak and frail. Grey elves are a very reclusive people. They highly value this seclusion, viewing it as independence from a corrupting outside world, and will fight fiercely to remain secluded from all, sometimes even from other elven subraces. Outside of that, they spend much of their lives indoors, seeking scholarly pursuits. Their societies are very rigidly defined hereditary monarchies. Much like the societies of Drow, personal freedom is not valued and movement is carefully restricted, with citizens of their cities being divided by a caste system. Snow elves live in Avarils, Okotayan, and the northern reaches. Their snow-white skin and bluish hair make them stand out in the crowds of more common elves. Their skin is so attuned to the cold that the outer layer is crystallized. Even a strong handshake can make the sensitive layer flake off, causing pain. Arctic elves live even further to the north, living a nomadic life in the northern reaches. They have light skin and white hair, and their bodies are resistant to Arctic cold. The Arctic elves require more energy to support their bodies in such environments, so they require more time in trance than all other elves. The Avarils or winged elves are without a doubt the most reclusive and least numerous of the elven subraces on Karilan. Many scholars have long dismissed them as creatures of myth. In truth, small numbers of Avarils still dwell in Karilan, concealed in hidden enclaves in remote mountains and in the cloud villages in the sky. The most striking feature of the Avarils is their soft, feathered wings. Their wings have spans of anywhere from 12 to 16 feet and are usually white, but may also be grey, brown, black or speckled. Avarils take great pride in their wings and spend long hours grooming them. Their skin is pale, often porcelain white, with tinges of blue or faint silver. They have silver-white or black hair, with other shades being rare but not unheard of. The Avarils' eyes are rather large and more expressive than those of other elves, and they tend to be brilliant shades of blue or green. A few Avaril have scintillating violet eyes as pure as amethysts. Avarils stand 5 feet 9 inches tall on average, with thin, graceful limbs and angular facial features. They are the most beautiful and striking of the elven races, although too often this beauty is marred by haughtiness and condescension towards their land-bound kin, whom they often pity. Avarils are even more delicate than other elves, and their movements are quick, calculated and graceful. They prefer to wear loose-fitting, diaphanous clothing that catches the wind in flight and ripples and weaves in the air. Armor is almost never worn, because it tends to weigh the Avarils down and hinder their graceful motion. Most elves live on the ground, a few live beneath it. Sky elves live above it. Sometimes called cloud elves, they dwell on large, towering cumulonimbus clouds, often ones that bring lightning and hailstones to folk below. While most clouds form and disappear, a sky elf's home can be as permanent and as tall as a mountain, and as hard to propel. How clouds were enchanted to enable people to walk and function normally on them, and to last virtually forever, is unknown. The Sky Elves are thought to be an offshoot of the Grey Elf subrace. The Sky Folk can travel from enchanted cloud to enchanted cloud, often using a small magical cumulus for transport. They also use various movement spells. While Sky Elves are perfectly comfortable strolling on permanent clouds, they can't walk on regular clouds without magic. Most cannot fly, unlike the Avarils. Despite their excellent balance, then, they usually avoid doing anything near the edges. This and their common fear of the ground help explain why they and their gardens are rarely seen from below. Sky Elves can have skin of any color found in humans. Eyes are often blue, yellow, or cloudy gray. Of the various elven subraces, none are more notorious than the Drow. Descended from the High Elves, the Drow were cursed into their present appearance by the good elven deities for following the goddess Love down the path of evil and corruption. Also called Dark Elves, the Drow have black skin that resembles polished obsidian and stark white or pale yellow hair. They commonly have blood-red eyes, although pale eyes, so pale as to be often mistaken for white, in shades of pale lilac, silver, pink and blue are not unknown. They tend to be smaller and thinner than most Karilanian elves. Most Drow live in the Middle Dark and worship Lolth. Though divided by endless feuds and schisms, the Drow are united in one terrible desire. They seethe with a hatred for the surface elves. Drow are on the whole sadistic, destructive and treacherous. They view themselves as the rightful heirs to Karilan, and still remember their perceived injustice of their exile to the Underdark. They hate other races and either wish to make war upon them, or view those others with contempt and tolerate them only as necessary for trade or temporary military alliances. Even among their own kind, Drow are cruel and suspicious. There is little room for love and friendship in Drow society. They may value alliances with other family members or acquaintances, but no Drow truly trusts another. Drow forge alliances only when they are more powerful than an ally, possess blackmail-worthy knowledge, or have a common enemy that overrides their mutual hatred. Even then, they keep their eyes and ears primed for the slightest hint of treachery. The motto for the Drow may well be, "Do unto others first, so they can do unto you." Deep dragons are among the most dangerous hunters in the Underdark. Thanks to their ability to assume humanoid form, they frequently interact with other denizens of these shadowy tunnels while posing as Drow. In this guise, deep dragons explore dark elf communities and forge powerful alliances, often without the Drow realizing the truth about their new partners. In some cases, these relationships produce half-dragon offspring, and these bloodlines have a way of manifesting themselves in later generations as deep worm Drow. Such Drow are typically sinuous in build, with skin that has maroon or purple highlights. The Finial are the only elves that are not native to Karilan. Technically speaking, they are not related to the Wind Elves at all, but they are listed here just for their ties to the Drow. The Finial, also known as Night Flyers, originated on the same world as the Telvar, a planet known as Tyr. The deadly conflict between the Grey Elves and Drow on Tyr occurred shortly after the world was created. The Grey Elves drove the Drow underground, where the Dark Elves plotted their return to the surface for centuries. One of the questions the Drow faced was how to deal with the Telvar, who were certain to side with the other surface races against any invasion from the subterranean Drow. The Telvar's mobility could wreak havoc on the loosely organized humanoid tribes the Drow planned to use to spearhead their conquest. The Drow recognized the need to develop a flying contingent of their own, one that would be both loyal and willing to face the Telvar in their own element. The Finial were the result of this strategic necessity. The offspring of a selective breeding process between Drow and Tanar'ri allies, the Fa'anil have qualities of both ancestors. When the Drow attacked the surface world, the Fa'anil were at the forefront of the greatest Drow victories. This military superiority was proven when the war ended after 50 years and sunlight returned to Tyr. When the rest of the Drow were destroyed or driven underground, the two Fa'anil fortresses, Morvan and Moddan, withstood repeated assaults. The Fa'anil remained in their isolated strongholds to this day, gaining strength and plotting. Since the war on Tyr, the Fa'anil have spread slowly to other worlds, including Karilan, although the center of their society remains in the fortresses of Morvan and Moddan. The Fa'anil resemble their Drow ancestors, though they are slightly taller and usually have some distinguishing mark that indicates their Tanar'ri ancestry. They all have huge bat-like wings and slightly elongated fingers and toes. They wear tight clothing when flying and elaborate robes and cloaks when in one of their two fortresses. Unlike Drow society, the Fa'anil hierarchy is not dominated by females. There are equal numbers of high-ranking men and women, although strong families still wield considerable power. Fa'anil who leave the dark fortresses to become adventurers usually do so for one of two reasons. Either their family has been disgraced, and to avoid death they flee into the outside world, or they are perceived to be an alicus. These rare individuals, a result of the imperfect breeding program that created the Fa'anil, have the ability to become powerful wizards but lack the normal Fa'anil penchant for destruction. The alicus are viewed as threats to Fa'anil society and are ruthlessly dealt with when they have been identified. A few escape, though, to become outcasts of Fa'anil society. The Zakon of House Zakvandiri are part Drow, part Wood Elf, yet divorced from each of their parent races. Generations of selective breeding have created a type born to serve a specific purpose, to sail the Zankraban. Although others have since managed to steal the Zakon's secret, none match the skill or devotion of the Wind Shippers. To the Zakon, nothing is more precious than being selected to serve aboard a wind ship. Zankraban captains, or sky mistresses, hold the most privileged positions of their clans. To fly is a young Zakon's highest aspiration, yet only the most talented are chosen for that duty. Unlike full-blooded Drow, the Zakon have no aversion to sunlight or bright illumination. However, they have lost all of their magical abilities of the Drow, except that they retain a partial magical resistance as a result of their dark elven heritage. The Umbragan, also known as Shadow Elves, are an offshoot of the Drow race, twisted by generations of arcane experimentations and devotion to the powers of Shadow. Shadow Elves have jet black skin, pale hair, and slender elven builds. At a distance, Umbragan are indistinguishable from Drow, but up close a few distinctive features become visible. The eyes of a Shadow Elf are pure black, with no iris or white, while the skin of the Umbragan has an oily gleam, almost as if liquid shadow was flowing across their skin. A Shadow Elf has the personality of a predator. His fellow Umbragan are his allies in the hunt, and they alone have his respect and loyalty. All other creatures are potential prey, unworthy of respect or pity. With this in mind, the Shadow Elf is always searching for ways to turn a situation to his advantage or to exploit weakness in a foe. While he is ruthlessly efficient when required, if given the opportunity, a Shadow Elf prefers to play with his prey. Conflict is the one pleasure of the Umbragan, and a Shadow Elf would rather lead an opponent into an ambush than kill him outright. The Umbragan are not fools, however, and refuse to throw away victory for a fool's game. If the odds are even, a Shadow Elf draws out the conflict to savor his victory. They believe that order and discipline is vital to the continued survival of their race, and they are willing to do anything in the pursuit of this goal. They expect treachery from other creatures and thus feel no remorse for actions they take against their enemies or temporary allies. The majority of Umbragan encountered in the world are searching for weapons to use in the war against the forces of Pictal, and some extraplanar invaders too, if rumors are to be believed. Powerful artifacts, forgotten spells, or anything else that could turn the tide. The Rockseer is one of the rarest types of elves. Rockseers separated themselves from the rest of elvenkind millennia ago, due to their own myths. Rockseer history tells that they were cowards at the great battle that forever separated Karilan and Lolth, fleeing below ground to hide. As such, Rockseers believe themselves to be shunned by the elven gods, and Rockseer clerics are unheard of. Rockseers are calm, enigmatic, and extraordinarily hard for outsiders to understand. An average Rockseer stands 7 to 8 feet tall and weighs between 120 to 140 pounds, with little difference between genders. Rockseers have pale, almost ice blue eyes, very pale skin and long, extraordinarily fine silky silver hair with no body hair. Typically they dress very plainly in a brown and grey cloak and garments that blend in with the surroundings. Rockseers exist in too few numbers to risk pointless deaths, so they abstain from fighting whenever possible. If forced to fight, a Rockseer will unflinchingly defend to the death others of his own kind. A Rockseer is usually armed with a longsword, dagger, spear, or a stone quarterstaff that is as hard as steel. Potential aggressors rarely even see Rockseer elves due to their great underground special skills. Rockseers know of the Drow and hate them, avoiding them as much as possible. They have no knowledge of any other elven race. They are extremely isolated by their choice, shunning the company of all other races save Svirfneblin and Pech. They have little curiosity about the ways of other folk due to their deep shame or their history. However, Rockseers rarely possess bows, as suitable bowstrings are difficult to come by underground, so they prize such items when they become available and would be willing to trade with anyone who had one. Another group of elven renegades fled to the west, to the Savage Lands. They call themselves Dusk Elves. The nobles who led the elven armies against the Dark Host deemed those who fled traitors, and Karilan vowed vengeance against them for their cowardice. Sehanine Moonbow did not share her counterpart's wrath and saw their flight as fitting for those who embrace her tenets. So, when the Drow were driven into the world's Underdark and Lolth was cast into the abyss, Sehanine sheltered those who abstained from the war as her chosen people, raising a veil to hide them from anyone seeking retribution. Over the intervening generations, the Dusk Elves lived in secret communities all across the Savage Lands, forbidden from returning to their homeland and afraid to range far from their hidden redoubts. Only after their ancient wars and their part in them began to fade, did such Dusk Elves venture farther afield. Elven memory is long indeed, and some elves bear the lost tribe ill will, but many find ways to look beyond the ancient offense and take these people for who they now are. Dusk Elves are a slight folk, and they look almost identical to their High Elf counterparts. Where they differ is in complexion. Although common elves favor tans and browns, Dusk Elves are as pale as moonlight, with fair hair and light blue or violet eyes. They favor subdued colors that are rarely ostentatious in their apparel. Where common elves are free-spirited and mercurial, Dusk Elves are furtive, haunted, and suspicious. Dusk Elves restrict their emotions to a narrow range, showing little joy and less grief. For all their disinclination for emotional displays, Dusk Elves are a people of deep feeling. When alone or among a few trusted people, they give in to their happiness and sorrow with surprising intensity. Dusk Elves value their privacy and guard their lands from trespassers. During private moments, they reflect on their nature, their people's history, and the plans Zakon has for them. They see the nature world as a prison, albeit a beautiful one, and pine for the fabulous cities and verdant fey lands they abandoned long ago. Wood Elves live in the central and southern Avaril in their forest cities. There are 5 subraces. Wood Elves, a subrace, not an ethnic group, are adept archers and druids that predominantly live in southern and central Avaril. These people have coppery skin tinged with green and brown, green or hazel eyes. Hair is usually brown or black, occasionally blonde or coppery red. Their ears are longer than those of other elven subraces. Wood Elves prefer to dress in simple clothing, similar to the High Elves but not as colorful. Wood Elves are calm, serene, and difficult to surprise. Their patience is legendary. They are at one with the world of nature, and are not comfortable in areas of heavy civilization. They have lost the urge to build and replace nature with walls and palaces. Even the cities built by their elven kin seem to be foolish to the Wood Elves. They have come to believe that buildings of stone are transitory in nature, and that in time the forest returns to overgrow the greatest of cities. Other races interpret this attitude as fatalistic or condescending, and as a result, Wood Elves find it hard to understand anyone who isn't a Wood Elf. Wood Elves live at ease with nature, using what naturally occurs in the world to shelter or defend themselves. Wild Elves are fierce warriors. They were always close to nature, even more so than other elves, but they have forgotten many of the high arts and lore of their people, choosing stealth and survival over building and book learning. Wild Elves are stocky and strongly built for elves. Their skin tends to be dark brown, and their hair ranges from black to light brown, lightening to silvery white with age. Their ears are slightly asymmetrical, allowing the elves to locate the sound source by hearing alone. They are quiet around anyone except their own kind, and quickly become hostile in these uncomfortable situations. Jungle Elves are the ones living in the ruins of Neogi cities. They have greenish skin and long black hair. Jungle Elves are known for their expertise with poison and the high-tech devices found in the Neogi ruins. Living in the jungles full of poison flora and fauna made them resistant to respiratory contaminants. The Illy Elves of the Thurek forest eschew arcane studies and instead concentrate on the power of the mind. Being descended from Wood Elf slaves captured by the Neogi, they have developed a psionic potential that became a hereditary trait. They look like Wood Elves but usually have fairer skin tones. The Forest Lord Elves of Pelassa are easily distinguishable from Wood Elves by their smooth green skin, similar to the color of a green dragon's scales. Most of them also have green hair, though it ranges from brown to white on occasion. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.